Welcome to The Hill's Coronavirus Report. I'm Steve Clemons, editor-at-large of The Hill. Each day we are interviewing notable leaders in the battle against the coronavirus. While I think that the front line of fighting this virus are people like you and your families who are mostly at home, and the healthcare workers risking their lives to save us, members of Congress also have a key role and can help move resources and money and can focus the spotlight on those most in need. And one of those doing exactly that is Representative Debbie Dingell, representing Michigan, which has been hard hit by the coronavirus. Her daily briefings have become a comfort to thousands of Michiganders, just as that state counts more than 24,000 positive cases. It's an uphill battle, to be sure. Congresswoman Dingell, so good to be able to speak with you today. Let me ask you to start maybe by just giving us a profile of how your community is doing and how you're engaged in this challenge.
Well, Steve, Michigan's been the third hardest hit in the country. We're still the third highest number of deaths, and I myself have known almost 20 people that have died since this last month as we've all been at home. And it's ranged from a relative to a number of older people that I've just known for a long time, and you can't grieve, you can't mourn for them. So it's been hard. And there have been a lot of challenges. The nurses and the doctors that are scared to death, asking for help, needing PPE. None of us knew what PPE was a month ago. Now we all know it's personal protection equipment, and it's been way too hard to get it for those of those on the front line. I talk to my fire and police every day, and they're facing challenges. And then I'm so grateful to our grocery store workers and our drivers and the people that are working in the drugstores. Our heroes are really these frontline people that are keeping a civil society structure in place.
Yesterday, I had the privilege of interviewing the mayor of Miami, and I asked him to critique the federal government response. And his response was, you know, as mayor, we are feeling right now very alone. We'd like to see more, but we have to basically work to get the resources to get to people. You are part of that federal government, and what do you think when people look at you and they interact with you? Are they happy with what the federal government is doing right now, or do they find it lacking?
You know, I have to say this. I'm not going to be political right now. None of us can afford to be political. We're all in this together, and we are fighting an invisible enemy. I have been frustrated on some days, but what I do is you talked about when you opened the show. I write a personal blog every day because people need to know that how they're feeling is normal. And I'm going through every feeling that other people have. I have not been physically with anybody. I've kept my physical distance for 30 days. I take my temperature every morning and just the ups and downs of that. But I have a twice weekly call with all of my mayors, all of my county officials, my elected representatives to talk to them. They tell me what the latest issues are. I dig in. I go to war. And trust me, I've tried to stay calm, but I've lost it a couple of times. So what I do, my job is to be in touch with every one of my constituencies. I talk to my hospitals every day. I talk to the police and fire every day. I understand. I've been lucky that I've got several of the manufacturers that are starting to produce the PPE. I've been on the phone cutting red tape, getting masks flown in from China, finding airplanes to fly those masks, talking to Ford, they were the first people to really make some of the PPE equipment here. And the first thing they made were face masks. I called every member of the Michigan delegation and said, or not face masks, but face guards. And we got them to all the fire and police after the hospitals got them there. Every single day, what's the problem? What do we need to solve it? You get people together, you brainstorm, you strategize, you keep fighting until you can deliver, and then you hear the next problem.
Congresswoman, I saw a statement that you put out with four other members of Congress, Pramila Jayapal, Mark Pocan, AOC, and Barbara Lee, and it was a very powerful statement that I want to read here. It said, number one, health is a top priority for all people, no exceptions. Provide economic relief directly to the people, number two. Number three, rescue workers and communities, not corporate executives. Number four, make a down payment on a regenerative economy while preventing future crises. And last and fifth, protect our democratic process while protecting each other. What were you trying to communicate in this joint statement about right now? This represents a deficit, I think, in what you're seeing out there that you're trying to respond to.
Well, the first thing we have to do is to worry about the health of every single American. We need to make sure that everybody has access to health care, that they don't worry whether they can afford the test, whether they can afford to stay home. If they are sick, that they're going to get sick pay, that they can see a doctor and they can afford their medicine. But then we also have to, these are really scary times. People are losing their jobs, they're being furloughed, and they don't know how they're going to live or whether they're going to be paid. And we need to worry about that. What we were trying to do is to set out a core values, even in my own state, let alone I've said this to the White House and I've said it here in Michigan in some pretty tough conversations some days with well-intentioned business executives who don't understand that the worker matters. That as you talk about how do you reopen the economy, or quite frankly, I was even having these discussions before the auto plants shut down. Workers were scared to go in those plants. People they were working with were COVID positive. Chrysler has lost 14 employees that were in the plant. Ford's now lost a dozen. People are afraid to go back in those plants. And any discussion about reopening has to include the worker, the asset, the greatest asset that an employer has, so that they know they're going to be safe, healthy when they return to work. And then we all are worried about, I'm not doing politics right now. If not done politics, won't talk it right now. But we do need to make sure that our election process is protected when we go have our November presidential elections.
So how do you get people back to work? There's been a lot of talk about not enough testing, that to go back to work, we just don't test people that are showing symptoms because this is spread asymptomatically in many cases by people. And thus we've got to have a testing regime that tests the people that are well. That's what President Trump's former Homeland Security advisor said. We need to test the well, not just the ill. And I'm interested in what you think we need to put in place to get people back to work, to reopen the economy in a sensible way.
So I'm going to say this to you, Steve, because I've been in a lot of pretty intense discussions in the last week. And first of all, I was talking to a group of business executives. So I come from the business community, but they had a large group of business representatives from every industry, and they didn't have the worker. And then they thought one labor person might be able to represent them. Well, every industry has a different set of skills that their worker has. I've been working very hard because people really aren't thinking about what it means to reopen a factory. They've learned best lessons from China, and there are things to learn, but I wouldn't necessarily call China best lessons, who doesn't necessarily value every life either. But what does that look like? And the point that you just made, I want to tell you what the workers have said to me. They're going to take temperatures now. I think we're going to start to see temperature taking as almost routine as going through x-ray at some places. But as you just said, the workers have said to me, we're not dumb. We've heard people are asymptomatic and spreading this, and we don't know. So how do we know that we have it? They want tests, but we don't have those tests available. So we have to figure out how we're going to increase testing in the society, how companies are going to have access to it. And we also know that testing somebody on a Tuesday isn't going to make them clean in another week. So how do you randomize testing? Are people going to wear masks to work? Are they going to wear gloves? How do you separate them on an assembly line? All of these things are being discussed right now. And I'm quite frankly I'm working with the Speaker and the Ed and Labor Committee in Congress on OSHA standards so that we can assure the worker that they are safe. Many of them are anxious to go back to work. They're worried about income. They don't want to go back before it's safe to go to work. But how do we make sure they're safe when they do go back to work?
You've talked about the workers, and our unemployment figures are through the roof. I think we're at now officially 17 million full-time unemployed that are now applying, making first-time applications for unemployment benefits. And this all despite the stimulus package, all despite the efforts to get businesses to retain workers and give them economic benefits and loans to do that. Do you think we're getting it right in terms of looking at how we're stimulating the economy and setting up incentives so that people have connection to an ongoing livelihood and work down the road?
So many of those people that are applying for unemployment are furloughed or they're on temporary unemployment. We have to figure out how they have a job to go back to when this is over. And what we want to do right now is keep in place, I call it the structure for a civilized society, that people know that they have money to eat, that they've got electricity, cable, a roof over their head, which a lot of people, we're having to deal with significant homeless populations too. But the unemployment pay combined with the 600 additional payment in that check is giving people economic relief for the moment. And we may have to extend the period of time of which they are
Mm.
eligible. We'll be looking at that in the Care 2 package. But I think we all have to work together to make sure that we are giving people that feeling of economic security. And then when we have protected lives, you can't bring a lost life back. We'll restart the economy.
Congresswoman, the other day I walked by a sculpture in Washington, D.C., town that you're often in, of someone on a bench. It was a homeless person lying down on the bench. And it made me think about the most vulnerable in society that may not be able to socially distance, wash their hands every moment, do all of the things we're saying that almost sound like practices of the privileged. And I'm interested in the other dimensions of this: mental health, those that are homeless, those that are the most vulnerable in society. Are we doing enough? Should we be doing much more to deal with that? Because as you've written and said, and I've been reading what you've been writing, this hits from the high to the low. It doesn't discriminate, and it can be spread by any one of us. So I'm interested in your reactions.
We're not doing enough. One of the things that I've been working with my local governments on is what to do about homeless, because the homeless shelters, first of all, some of the religious homeless shelters start to close as the weather gets better. So we're having to make alternative arrangements. But even more frightening is in the tight living conditions that you have in homeless shelters, this virus is spreading very rapidly. My local governments have been renting hotels and making hotel rooms available to the homeless, but there are too many that are still on the street and they don't know how to get health care. And, we're trying to make sure that we're getting more food to them. One of the first things that we did in our second bill was to make sure that kids who rely on schools to get 2 meals a day would still have food at home when the schools close. Uh, one of the things I've worked with Rashida Tlaib on, which I began 6 weeks ago or 2 months ago, was running water. We were telling people the biggest way to avoid this becoming a public health crisis, we didn't succeed, but was to tell people to wash your hands. But how can you wash your hands if you don't have running water? So we've had to
Mm.
really prioritize as a country what some of these basic needs are. And too many of us take running water for
Mm.
granted. And I have come to a conclusion, or thoughtfully, water is a human right. Shouldn't every human being have access to water?
You are famous for working across the aisle with, in particular, Fred Upton, a Republican from Michigan. Have you been communicating with Fred? Have you been working with him on any of these issues?
Fred and I talk 10 times a day. We say good morning, figure out what our agenda is, and he calls to. I'm lucky. I have several people that call to check on me, and Fred and Amy call every night to make sure I'm okay. And I'm very grateful for that. But, I'll tell you something else. We work problems together. We don't look at them as political. I'll give you an example. A hospital called to tell me they were laying off 2,500 people. They really hadn't thought it all through, even on how they were communicating it. Hospitals are having a real problem in terms of liquidity, being able to pay people. So I asked them if they'd told the governor. They hadn't. They hadn't told the hospital association. But I picked up the phone and I said, Fred, we got a problem. And Fred and I were immediately on the phone together. He got HHS, I got the governor. Then Fred and I did a conference call with the head of the hospital associations, et cetera. And we started working it through with the hospital system in a way
Wow.
to help them and to minimize the impact on our communities. And
Right.
Fred and I approach every issue that way.
Right.
We get up and say, okay, what's got to get done today? What do we need to do?
Right.
He's a Republican. He has better access to the administration, and
Yeah.
I have know what the Democrats are doing, and we pull people together, and we'll keep pulling people together.
Debbie, in our last couple of seconds, I know you issue a thought of the day. What is your thought of the day today?
You know, a lot of people are going through tough times, and sometimes they don't think they've got the confidence or they've got the emotional wherewithal to get through this. One, we're going to get through this as a community, but just remember that a diamond becomes what it is through pressure. An oak tree grows with a lot of hard wind. That was my thought for the day in my daily writing. But we are going to get through this together because we do have each other. And it's hard. It's scary. You can go stark raving mad like me. You can even start to see the gray.
Yeah.
But we will get through it together because we're there for each other.
Well, Congresswoman Dingell, thank you so much for being with us today. And thank you all for joining me for the Hill's Coronavirus Report. See you tomorrow. Stay well.